Welcome to Season 2 of Press the Button, titled The Shadow of Oppenheimer. This season, we will talk about who is left behind in the pursuit of a false sense of security. The story starts in 1945 with one man, J. Robert Oppenheimer. But the people affected total in the millions, and the fallout of that decision continues to this day. I'm Angela Kellett, the executive producer of the podcast.
And I'm Jacqueline Hsing, the editor of the podcast. Throughout this season, we will look at the shadow left behind by Oppenheimer and the lives that exist within that shadow, impacted communities, nuclear workers, and more. We will also look at the way that pop culture, specifically the newly released Christopher Nolan film, tends to focus solely on the man and not those left behind in the shadow.
This is a national emergency. Our work here will ensure a peace mankind has never seen. The world will remember this day.
So clearly, this is not the first time in pop culture that there has been a focus on Oppenheimer. The movie is heavily influenced by the biography American Prometheus by Kai Bird and Martin Sherwin. There has been documentaries, series, and other films made about both the man and the creation. That creation, nuclear weapons, have been used throughout pop culture in various extremes of accuracy.
Think about your favorite movie, show, or book that mentions nuclear weapons. And there are a lot of examples. How factually accurate do you think they are? The answer, you could probably guess, varies greatly.
What the hell is it?
Early warning satellites detected multiple Russian launches.
What? Seligov can't be that crazy.
He said he'd hit us back after Syria.
By launching nukes?
Cover Falcon! Cover Falcon!
Flour and rice are quite good. Attack warning.
Is it for real?
Attack warning's for bloody real.
Is it?
Right, get to your stations. Come on, move yourself. Get that generator going. Shut the doors.
But look here, Doctor, wouldn't this nucleus of survivors be so grief-stricken and anguished that they'd, envy the dead and not want to go on living?
But this latest iteration, the Oppenheimer film by Christopher Nolan, is no different. But for a film that utilizes silent moments for maximum dramatic effect, it misses the opportunity to use that silence to showcase those most impacted. So, just so listeners know, since we will be talking about the film, there will be spoilers for the movie and for history in general.
And if you already watched the film, then honestly, congrats for being able to sit through a 3-hour-long movie. It was a long one.
So let's jump right in. This is a historical film, it's based on a biography, but it's also clearly a Hollywood film.
And we can clearly see that in the opening scene. There is a story about a poisoned apple and Oppenheimer supposedly poisoning his tutor's apple, and then Niels Bohr almost eats it and Oppenheimer has to slap it out of his hand. Yeah, that is an exaggeration on top of an already contested story. If you've read American Prometheus, there's a lot of hearsay about the story. Some people don't believe it actually happened. Some people do. So the filmmakers took a lot of liberties there, especially in adding Niels Bohr, who is not mentioned in the original story at all. This sets the tone in a sense, because it showcases from the start that this film is not following the history books 100% and is instead following this narrative that they wanted to tell, which is this film is about Oppenheimer and how he was a conflicted man throughout his youth and following his Los Alamos years and beyond.
The location of Los Alamos, which is in New Mexico, it's interesting when you think about it because he references the ranch that he and his brother own near Santa Fe as, quote, home, when he's talking about being homesick when he's in Europe. But that home is a location he chose for what would become the first nuclear weapons test. A test that they were aware of in the production phases could have negative health impacts, as the scientists made references to negative health impacts on a woman's reproductive health in the film. Then there's a montage of the creation of Los Alamos, where he becomes the pseudo-mayor of sorts of that town, something that Strauss even mentions in the end. The town adored him because he created it.
And there was also other things beyond the negative health impacts on a woman's reproductive health that wasn't really talked about. The film also left out talk about how there were native New Mexicans who worked mining the plutonium, who worked in the houses of those who lived there and who lived on that land before the workers of Los Alamos came to build the atomic bomb. And they were an integral part of the creation of that town, and there were no references to them or seen once on camera. The film doesn't mention any of them, even though that is their home and their story.
This community has been traumatized over and over again, especially in the production phases of this film, during which parts of it were taped in New Mexico, and there was this anxiety period for those involved that they had no idea what was going to be discussed about the film. We will hear directly from some in the community next week, so they can talk about how the Trinity test has affected them and how this film has impacted them.
And let's also talk about the only 2 references to Hanford, which sourced a lot of the enriched plutonium that was used for the project. For those who do not know, the Hanford plant was established in 1944 as part of the Manhattan Project, and the plant is located in Washington state. Much of the enriched plutonium that was used for the Trinity test, and then for the bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, were sourced in Hanford. Like those in New Mexico, the community that lived near the Hanford plant were the ones who did the dirty work, but were not aware of the risks. To this day, those who lived in Hanford and continue to live in Hanford have to deal with radiation-exposed related illnesses. At the same time, the government continues to not take accountability for its actions.
We heard this from Trisha Thompson Pritikin in episodes 8 and 9 of Season 1 during Taking Back the Narrative. She is from Hanford, and she's the author of the book The Hanford Plaintiffs, Voices from the Fight for Atomic Justice. This book tells the heartbreaking stories of people whose lives were forever changed due to the Hanford plant, and now have radiogenic diseases that have wrecked the community and their health. This was yet another opportunity for the film to touch on the lives impacted by nuclear weapons, and it didn't.
Yeah, we understand that the film could not include everything. The movie is already 3 hours long. The book itself it was based on is 600 pages, and it is crammed full of information. There was just a lot of historical record about Oppenheimer, about the Manhattan Project, and everything that happened after. But there were moments in the film where the impacts of radiation were referenced briefly, such as one scene where there was the only female scientist that was portrayed in the movie. She was told that she should probably not be working with plutonium because it could have negative reproductive health effects, and they did not know. So rather than acknowledging that comment or going into more detail, the film makes it a bit of a joke with her response to a male colleague. So it just completely flies past that really serious effect and consequences of nuclear weapons that a lot of people today are dealing with because it's a real thing. Nuclear weapons affects health so deeply, and it still does for those survivors, those downwinders, and those plutonium workers.
This all culminates in how the film portrays Oppenheimer's feelings about the bomb and its creation. Throughout the film, many of the characters reference that they do not know how Oppenheimer feels about anything, let alone the impacts of what he created. I think it's important to note the scene where Oppenheimer is in front of the board who will decide if his security clearance is renewed. The scene plays very dramatically. It has audio from Strauss going on a monologue about how Oppenheimer wanted to be the father of the atomic bomb, while still being a martyr. Meanwhile, you are visually seeing him being interrogated for all intensive purposes about why he was opposed to the H-bomb, which is the hydrogen bomb, which he did not create, but he supported the A-bomb, which is the atomic bomb. The reality is messy and not as cinematic as we may like. It's not a clear story from A to B. But in this fictional portrayal, you see him watch images of a slideshow of the aftermath of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You see him have nightmare visions of sorts of people in Los Alamos who have impacts as if the bombs were dropped on them. And he even corrects the president about how we dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We do see the lead up to the day of the Trinity test, the mad rush to get it done, the physicists all lining up to watch it like it's a drive-in theater. And we see the town cheer for him at the end of the event.
Angela, because we both work in the nuclear policy field, we both have a lot of context and information that the general viewer may not have. So they're going into this film not knowing what is fact and what is fiction, and that line can get kind of blurry.
Truman has a quote in the film that says, quote, "You know when the Soviets will get a bomb? Never." This is fiction, but the sentiment did exist. The confidence that other countries wouldn't obtain nuclear weapons and that the thought that the US had an abundance of nuclear weapons, that no one else would even consider having it. This is not true. Currently, there are 9 nuclear weapon states. According to the Nuclear Notebook by the Federation of American Scientists in 2023, it is estimated that Russia has 5,889 nuclear weapons, and the US has 5,244 nuclear weapons. China is rapidly developing and modernizing its nuclear arsenal to reach a parity of sorts with Russia and the United States. President Vladimir Putin of Russia, through his invasion of Ukraine, has used Russia's vast nuclear arsenal as an attempt to prevent international intervention by threatening the use of nuclear weapons. So clearly the notion that other countries would not dare to obtain nuclear weapons if the US had them was wrong.
At the end of the day, this film is from Oppenheimer's perspective. It follows him, his life, his perspective. But you know what? There's already so much historical record and biographies and documentaries about him and his work. There's not a lot about the downwinders, the plutonium workers, the people who are still suffering the consequences of nuclear weapons. So while we can look at this movie and you can decide whether you enjoyed it or not, if you liked it, if you thought it was good, if you thought it was bad or left something out, those decisions are up to you. But we've had enough of those conversations, I think, about Oppenheimer. It's time to look at and to talk about what isn't being talked about. And that is everybody else who was involved.
The dramatics of this film, with intense sounds and flashing lights in juxtaposition with quiet moments in black and white, could have truly been an opportunity for the film to even quickly acknowledge the human impact of these weapons. The film does not show on screen the impacts of Hiroshima or Nagasaki. It does not show any of the native New Mexicans who were impacted by the Trinity test or who helped with the existence of Los Alamos. The film offhandedly mentions Hanford, but did not mention the severe health impacts that community has faced afterwards. And there's so much more to say, and to learn, and to do. But thank you for joining us and listening today, because this is how we become one conversation closer to building a safer nuclear future. So please stay tuned for next week, where we will be talking exclusively about the Trinity test.
Thanks for listening to Press the Button. This podcast is produced and edited by Angela Kellett and Jacqueline Hsing. Our theme song is Black Nymph by Peridot. To continue the dialogue and support our work, visit plowshares.org.